So, I want you to picture this. It's dawn, right, in the ancient city of Varanasi.
Right, the air's freezing.
Yeah, exactly. It's freezing. It's misty. And you have this pilgrim stepping down a set of stone steps, the Ghats, and they're wading out into the water.
Mm.
And they close their eyes, cup the water in their hands, and, bring it to their lips to drink. And they are just overwhelmed by this sense of profound spiritual purification.
Because to them, in that exact moment, the river is flawlessly pure. It's divine.
Right. But then pull the camera back, move just a few miles upriver to the industrial hubs near Kanpur. And what you find is this massive factory outfall pipe just violently pumping heavy metals and raw, untreated leather tanning chemicals directly into that exact same current.
Yeah, it really is the ultimate paradox. I mean, how does a society hold both of those realities in its hands without breaking?
Yeah.
Like, how can a river be so deeply spiritually purifying while at the exact same physical moment being just dangerously toxic?
Which brings us to welcome you to the deep dive. Today, we are taking this massive stack of research. We're talking hydrology, ecology, sociology, political science, theology, economics, and we are aiming all of it at one single, deeply misunderstood subject.
The Ganges River.
Right. And our mission today is not, it's not to give you just a standard geography lesson. You are here because you want to understand how the world actually works.
Exactly.
So our objective is to figure out how this massive body of water operates simultaneously as a glacier-fed hydrological system, an agricultural engine, a severe pollution crisis.
A tense geopolitical battleground, too.
Right. And of course, a deeply revered living sacred deity.
Because, to really understand the Ganges, you can't just look at it as a body of water. The data we have makes it overwhelmingly clear that it functions as an entire civilizational system.
So to start unpacking this, I was looking through the hydrological reports, and they basically argue that to understand our human relationship with the Ganges, we have to establish a baseline first.
Right, we have to strip the human element away completely.
Yeah, figure out what this river physically is before humanity ever started, pouring concrete. And the first thing these reports do is they attack the way we draw maps. They call it the fixed blue line fallacy.
Yeah, the fixed blue line fallacy. It's such a crucial distinction, honestly. When you look at a standard map, you just see a neat blue line snaking across a continent.
Right, like a highway.
Exactly, a blue highway. And that line implies this binary world, like there's water here and then there's land there. It implies the river is essentially a pipe.
Right.
And that the only thing that matters is the liquid moving from point A to point B. But a river, especially this one, is not a line. It is a three-dimensional, deeply restless ecological corridor.
Right, because if you just see it as a blue line, you completely miss the groundwater aquifers, right? The ones hidden deep beneath the soil that are constantly exchanging water with the surface.
Yeah, and you miss the seasonal floodplain wetlands that stretch out for miles. You miss the whole living, breathing mechanism of the basin.
So breaking down the physical reality of the Ganges, the research says it's shaped by three titanic forces. The first one being the Himalayan cryosphere.
The ice. Right. The headwaters emerge from these massive ancient glaciers way up in regions like Uttarakhand.
Right.
And this frozen reservoir provides what hydrologists call base flow.
Base flow, okay.
Yeah, it's basically the steady, reliable drip of meltwater that keeps the river moving even in the absolute driest months.
Okay, so the glacial melt gives us a baseline, but reading through the historical accounts of the region, that baseline doesn't explain the massive, violent floods that define life on the plains.
No, not at all.
I mean, the ice alone can't generate that kind of explosive volume. So what triggers the volatility?
Well, that brings us to the second force, which is the chaos of the monsoon.
Ah, right.
The atmosphere above the Indian Ocean gathers just unimaginable amounts of moisture, and weather systems pull that moisture directly into the Himalayas where it's forced upward, cools down, and then just dumps torrential rain.
Just a wall of water.
Literally. Unlike rivers in, say, temperate zones that get steady rainfall year-round, the Ganges experiences these massive, dramatic pulses of water. The monsoon dictates this aggressive rhythm of, explosive abundance followed by extreme volatility.
Okay, so we have ice and we have rain. But the third force, and this is the one that really changes how you look at the landscape, I think, because we are so obsessed with the liquid, we completely ignore the solid.
Yeah.
The third force is sediment.
Mud, silt, pulverized rock. A healthy river doesn't just move water. It moves the Earth itself.
Let's put a mechanical analogy to this, just because the sheer scale of the sediment transport detailed in the geological surveys is kind of hard to visualize.
Okay.
If the river is a massive continent-spanning conveyor belt, the water is just the motor, right? The sediment is the actual cargo.
That is a perfect way to conceptualize it.
Yeah.
I mean, the Himalayas are young, jagged mountains, and they're constantly being ground down by the ice and the rain.
Just pulverized.
Exactly. And the river acts as the transport mechanism, carrying millions upon millions of tons of this pulverized rock down from the peaks. And to truly grasp the scale of this conveyor belt, the geological data actually takes us back into deep time.
Like, how deep?
About 10,000 years ago, to the early Holocene epoch.
Oh, so the end of the last ice age.
Precisely. Global sea levels were rising rapidly, the monsoons were intensifying, and those massive Himalayan glaciers began to retreat, unleashing just an astronomical volume of water and ground-up rock.
Right.
The river at this time wasn't a single channel. It was this wild, braided landscape, like a vast network of wetlands, shifting channels, and marshes that just thrashed back and forth across the continent.
And as it thrashed, it was dropping its cargo.
Relentlessly. Flood pulse after flood pulse delivered so much sediment that it literally filled in the ocean.
Wait, really? It filled the ocean?
Yeah. The entire Bengal Basin, the landmass that millions of people live on today, was built by this conveyor belt. The ground under their feet is basically made of the pulverized Himalayas, transported by the Ganges and its sister rivers, like the Brahmaputra and the Meghna.
Oh, wow. So the land is quite literally the river's creation.
Exactly.
And that dictates the ecology, right? Because the biological surveys we reviewed, they show that the native biodiversity evolved to thrive in this exact kind of chaos.
Yeah, they depend on it.
For this ecosystem to function, the river has to flood. It needs to spill over its banks to deposit that nutrient-rich silt onto the plains. It needs to meander and change course.
And when the system functions naturally like that, the biodiversity is highly specialized. For instance, you have the Ganges River dolphin.
Oh, I read about this. It's incredible.
It really is. It's a species that is essentially blind. Over millions of years, it lost its eyesight because it lives in water so thick with Himalayan silt that vision is just useless.
So how does it hunt?
It hunts entirely, using complex echolocation.
That's wild.
And beyond the dolphins, you have massive soft-shell turtles, millions of migratory birds relying on the temporary floodplain wetlands. And then down at the very end of the line, you have the dense mangrove forests of the delta.
Right, which rely on a constant delivery of fresh mud to act as a buffer against the ocean's tides.
Exactly. So you have this beautifully restless, shifting system that needs to expand, contract, and move millions of tons of mud to survive.
But okay, if the river naturally wants to thrash around like an untethered fire hose, that presents a massive existential problem for human settlement.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, what happens when civilization decides to build permanent cities with concrete foundations and rigid property lines right on its banks?
Well, what happens is a collision. It's a collision between an immovable object, our infrastructure, and an unstoppable, highly variable force. And that collision is what built the modern engineered artery of the Ganges.
Because humanity demands stability. You can't build a predictable quarterly growth economy if your primary water source changes its mind about where it wants to flow every rainy season.
You really can't. Civilization requires a schedule, We need our farms watered predictably, and we need our homes to stay dry. And the stakes here are literally civilizational in scale. The Ganges waters the Indo-Gangetic Plain.
Which is one of the most productive agricultural engines on the planet.
It's the backbone of the food supply. The river deposits that nutrient-rich alluvial silt directly onto the floodplains, creating soil that supports staple crops like rice, wheat, and sugarcane. It effectively feeds hundreds of millions of people across India and Bangladesh.
But to guarantee that agricultural output, to keep those massive populations fed, humanity had to build an infrastructure of absolute control.
Right.
I mean, the engineering logs detail this continent-spanning effort to tame the hydrology. Up in the Himalayan headwaters of Uttarakhand, you have these massive hydropower dams.
Yeah, and these are engineered to capture the monsoon pulse, hold the water in vast reservoirs, generate electricity, and then release the water on a strict, human-dictated schedule.
And then further downstream, you have structures like the Faraka Barrage, which are designed to physically divert the main flow of the river into entirely different channels.
Mm-mm.
You have tens of thousands of miles of complex canal networks acting like a vascular system, branching off the main river to distribute water deep into the agricultural plains. And perhaps most significantly, miles and miles of artificial levees and embankments built right along the riverbanks.
So we are essentially trying to force this wild, sprawling ecosystem into a rigid set of concrete plumbing pipes.
Right. And we can build the dams, and we can control the water.
Hmm.
But going back to our conveyor belt analogy, the environmental audits make it very clear that our engineering completely ignores the cargo.
Yes, this is the sediment crisis. And it is arguably the most dangerous, invisible consequence of our infrastructure.
How so?
Well, when you build a dam upstream, it doesn't just stop the liquid, it stops the solid.
Mm.
The water hits the dam wall, its velocity just
Like
completely...
it just drops to zero.
Exactly, it drops to zero. And the millions of tons of mud and silt just drop to the bottom of the reservoir.
So the conveyor belt hits a brick wall.
Right. The motor keeps running like the dam eventually releases the water, but the cargo is trapped. So the water flowing downstream is now what hydrologists call hungry water.
Hungry water.
Right?
Because it has no sediment load.
Exactly. It has excess energy, so it aggressively erodes the riverbanks downstream. But more importantly, you're starving the delta.
The massive sprawling region down in the Bay of Bengal.
Right. Remember, the delta only exists because the river historically deposited enough new mud to outpace the ocean's natural erosion. It's this very delicate geological balance.
But by trapping the sediment upstream behind dams, we've cut off the supply.
We have. So the land down in the delta is now literally subsiding. It's sinking and washing away into the sea. And this is occurring at the exact same historical moment that global climate change is causing sea levels to rise and ocean cyclones to become more intense.
Oh, man. So the very engineering projects we built up in the mountains to make our lives safer and, generate power are directly accelerating the collapse of the land under the feet of millions of people living downstream in the delta.
It is a devastating chain reaction. I mean, you can control a liquid much more easily than you can control a solid.
Mm-hmm.
Water can be pumped and diverted. Sediment is heavy. It settles. It clogs.
Right.
Our infrastructure is built entirely for the liquid, and that fundamental imbalance creates massive geological instability.
And it's not just the dams causing instability either. It's the levees. I was reading through the civil engineering critiques and the sources, and they introduced this concept called the paradox of risk.
Oh, yes.
It completely upends how we think about flood control.
The paradox of risk is a brilliant sociological and engineering concept. It basically explains how our desperate attempts to stabilize a dynamic system actually increase the likelihood of extreme catastrophic failure.
Break down the fluid dynamics of that for us. Like, how does a wall built to stop a flood actually make the flood worse?
Okay, so historically, without levees, when the monsoon hit, the Ganges would rise, spill over its shallow banks, and just spread out across vast floodplains.
Right.
The floodwaters might cover huge areas, but the energy of the water was dissipated, and the depth was relatively shallow. It was a seasonal nuisance, but a manageable one. People adapted to it.
Like a spreading puddle.
Exactly, a spreading puddle. But then we build levees. We construct these massive earthen and concrete walls on either side of the river to protect our new cities and farms. Now, when the monsoon comes, the river cannot spread out.
It's trapped.
Right? The same massive volume of water is confined to a narrow, rigid channel. Because the water cannot expand horizontally, it has to expand vertically. The water level rises much, much higher. And because it's compressed, the velocity increases exponentially.
So we've basically turned a shallow puddle into a highly pressurized fire hose.
Exactly. Now, these levees are incredibly effective at stopping small seasonal floods. Year after year, the water stays in the channel.
Which makes people feel safe.
Right, the local population feels a deep, false sense of security. They build permanent houses and businesses right up against the levee walls, completely forgetting the historic danger of the floodplain.
And the sediment is still an issue here, right?
Oh, absolutely. Because that sediment we talked about is also trapped between the levees. It settles to the bottom, constantly raising the actual riverbed. In some places, the bottom of the river is now physically higher than the surrounding land.
Wow. So you have a pressurized, elevated river looming over a densely populated area.
And eventually, an extreme monsoon hits. The water overtops the levee, where the pressure causes a structural failure. The levee doesn't just overflow, it violently breaches.
And when it breaks?
It releases a catastrophic, deeply destructive wall of water into areas that are now packed with infrastructure and people who believed they were perfectly safe.
So the engineered stabilization guaranteed that when a failure finally occurred, it would be an absolute disaster.
Precisely.
We traded frequent, minor annoyances for rare, total catastrophes, the illusion of control.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
So, if this infrastructure creates such massive physical risks, why do we build it? Well, the economic data provides a very stark answer. Engineering a river creates massive opportunities for wealth extraction.
Yes, it does.
But what these economic analyses reveal is that this extraction isn't equitable at all. It creates a brutal, strict hierarchy of winners and losers.
An economy of extraction.
Yeah.
Once you engineer a river, you transition it from a living ecosystem into a resource pipeline.
Let's make this economic reality tangible for everyone. The pattern identified across all these sources basically boils down to a very simple formula. Value is extracted upstream while the costs are pushed downstream.
Right.
It's sort of like being at a massive buffet line. If you are upstream, you are at the very front of the line. You get the first choice of the water. You generate the hydropower. You siphon off the clean water for your irrigation. You take the best cuts.
And crucially,
Yeah, whatever dirty plates and trash you produce, you just leave on the table, and the river conveniently carries it away from you.
out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly. But if you live downstream, you are at the end of the buffet line. You get whatever scraps of water are left over, and you are handed the trash bags from everyone standing ahead of you.
It is the brutal mathematics of river geography. Let's look at the industrial engine driving this dynamic. Take a city like Kanpur, which sits right on the banks of the Ganges.
Yeah, okay.
Kanpur is a massive global center for textile manufacturing and leather tanning.
And the chemical mechanics of leather tanning are incredibly intense.
Highly intense. I mean, to turn a raw animal hide into leather, you have to stabilize the collagen proteins so they don't rot. To do this, the industry relies heavily on chromium sulfate.
Right.
It is a highly water-intensive process, and historically, many of these tanneries have used the river as an open, free-flowing sewer. The outfall pipes dump untreated effluent containing toxic hexavalent chromium directly into the water.
And this heavy metal bioaccumulates. It gets into the algae, which gets eaten by the small fish, which gets eaten by the larger fish, moving right up the food chain into human populations downstream.
Right.
But it's not just the heavy metals. The reports talk heavily about BOD, biological oxygen demand, explain how that actually kills the river.
It's a fascinating, if tragic, biological mechanism. Along with the chemicals, tanneries and municipal sewers dump massive amounts of organic waste feces, rotting animal flesh, blood into the water.
Yikes.
Yeah. And when this organic matter hits the river, the naturally occurring bacteria in the water go into an absolute feeding frenzy. They multiply exponentially to consume the sudden feast.
Okay.
But bacteria need to breathe. As they consume the waste, they suck all the dissolved oxygen out of the water.
So they literally suffocate the river.
Yes. The biological oxygen demand spikes so high that there's no oxygen left for anything else. The fish, the turtles, the river dolphins, they simply suffocate and die, leaving behind a dead anoxic zone.
Wow. And it's not just what we put into the river, it's what we take out. The extraction economy includes massive sand mining operations too.
Right. Because the rapid urbanization of India requires millions of tons of concrete, and concrete requires specific types of sharp, angular river sand to bind properly. You can't just use smooth desert sand.
Ah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so because the demand is insatiable, you have these massive operations, many of them illegal or poorly regulated, bringing in heavy dredgers to literally tear apart the riverbanks and scoop out the riverbed.
Which destroys the benthic habitats where fish spawn, drastically increases erosion, and fundamentally alters the fluid dynamics of the channel. I mean, they are physically dismantling the river to build the cities around it.
It is the ultimate form of geographical extraction, taking the physical structure of the river itself.
Now, this upstream-downstream dynamic doesn't just happen between neighboring towns. It scales all the way up to international geopolitics.
It does.
The political science sources detail the tension between India, which controls the upstream portion of the basin, and Bangladesh, which is situated entirely downstream, right at the delta.
Right. This is where hydrology dictates national security. The key flashpoint is the Farakka Barrage, located in the Indian state of West Bengal, just miles before the river crosses the border into Bangladesh.
It's a textbook zero-sum geographical dilemma. Break down the opposing needs here.
Okay, so from the Indian policymakers' perspective, the barrage is an absolute economic necessity. Further south is the major Indian port city of Kolkata, situated on the Hooghly River, which is a distributary of the Ganges.
Okay.
Over time, the Hooghly was silting up, threatening to choke off access for massive cargo ships. So India built the Farakka barrage to physically divert a massive volume of the Ganges water into the Hooghly.
They need the velocity of the diverted water to literally flush the mud out of the port.
Exactly. They're using the river's hydraulic power to dredge their economic hub. But, physics dictates that water diverted is water lost. So on the other side of the border in Bangladesh, where the river is known as the Padma, the impact is severe.
Because Bangladesh doesn't just need the water for farming, they need the physical volume of the fresh water to act as a shield.
Right. Estuaries are a battleground between freshwater and saltwater. The sheer volume and pressure of the Ganges pushing out into the Bay of Bengal is what keeps the ocean's saltwater wedge from creeping inland.
Oh, I see.
When India diverts the flow at Farakka, especially during the dry season when water is already incredibly scarce, the pressure drops. The freshwater shield weakens.
And the ocean pushes in.
Consequently, the saltwater from the ocean intrudes miles inland into Bangladesh, poisoning their freshwater aquifers, destroying their agricultural crops, and crashing the coastal ecosystems.
Value extracted upstream, catastrophic costs pushed downstream.
Exactly.
Now, the geopolitical sources do emphasize that there are diplomatic frameworks trying to manage this, primarily the Ganges Water Sharing Treaty of 1996, which attempts to mathematically allocate the dry season flow between the two nations.
But it is an incredibly fragile trust. The treaty allocates water based on historical data, but climate change is radically altering the monsoon patterns in the glacial melt. The rigid legal allocations written on paper often simply do not match the physical reality of the water available in the channel.
So, synthesizing all of this, the heavy metal pollution, the oxygen depletion, the water scarcity in Bangladesh, these aren't just like accidental byproducts of development. They are actual physical expressions of structural power.
That is the deepest insight from the sociological and economic data we looked at. Pollution and scarcity on the Ganges represent a structural power imbalance. The beneficiaries of the river's exploitation, the urban industries, the massive agricultural conglomerates, the municipal planners, are geographically or politically positioned to extract the wealth they need.
Right.
They possess the leverage to take the water and externalize the toxic costs.
While the vulnerable groups, the smallholder farmers dependent on the monsoon, the downstream fishing communities dealing with anoxic water, the rural poor whose groundwater is turning to salt water, they just don't have the political capital or the geographic advantage to stop it.
No, they don't.
If you control the flow of the water, you control the fate of the people downstream.
Completely. It is an engineered machine of water and power.
Okay, which brings us to, honestly, the most fascinating pivot in this entire deep dive. Because we have just spent all this time using exhaustive scientific, chemical, and economic data to establish that the Ganges is a heavily engineered, severely polluted geopolitical resource.
Right.
So how on earth do we reconcile that stark physical reality with the fact that hundreds of millions of people worship this exact same body of water as a living, breathing, divine deity?
That's amazing, isn't it? To understand that, we have to completely swap out our analytical lens. We have to look at the sacred contradiction. Because for a vast portion of humanity, the Ganges is not an it to be measured in cubic feet per second.
Right.
It is a she. It is Ganga Ma, Mother Ganges.
And the mythological origin stories detailed in the theological texts are just breathtaking.
They really are.
The narrative goes that Ganga was originally a celestial river, flowing purely through the heavens. But she was called to descend to earth to purify the ashes and liberate the souls of an ancient king's ancestors. However, her power was so absolute, the sheer force of a celestial ocean crashing down from the cosmos would have shattered the earth completely.
The physical weight of divinity.
Yeah. So the god Shiva intervened. He stood on the peaks of the Himalayas, and as the celestial river fell, he caught her in his densely matted hair.
Wow.
His hair broke the fall, dividing the crushing force of the water into gentle streams, softening her power so she could flow safely across the plains of India, bringing life and purification instead of annihilation.
It's a profoundly beautiful narrative, and it establishes a fundamental operating system for millions of Hindus. The river is a moral force. It is the physical manifestation of divine grace. It is quite literally a bridge intersecting heaven, earth, and the underworld.
And this isn't just like an abstract theological concept, it dictates the deep sociological reality of entire cities. The texts focus heavily on urban centers like Varanasi, Haridwar, and Prayagraj.
Right.
These places aren't just cities that happen to be located near a river, their entire civic, economic, and spiritual identity is built around ritual engagement with the water.
The rituals dictate the rhythm of daily life. Millions bathe in the river to cleanse themselves of karmic sins. They perform arti, offering fire and light to the goddess at dusk. And perhaps most powerfully, the river is the ultimate destination for the end of human life.
The cremation rites.
Yes, dying in Varanasi or having your ashes immersed in the current of the Ganges is deeply believed to help the soul achieve moksha liberation from the painful, endless cycle of death and rebirth.
Right.
Entire local economies, lineages of priests, and intricate social structures are organized around these funeral pyres and the profound pursuit of spiritual closure at the water's edge.
And then you have the festivals, which push this devotion to just an unimaginable scale. Let's talk about the logistics of the Kumila.
Oh, the Kumbh is one of the most staggering logistical and sociological events on the planet. It is one of the largest peaceful gatherings of humanity ever recorded. Tens of millions of pilgrims travel to bathe in the river at specific confluences during specific astrological alignments.
And just the municipal coordination required to pull this off is mind-blowing. The government essentially builds a pop-up megacity on the floodplain.
They really do.
They lay down temporary electrical grids, build pontoon bridges across the river, set up massive sanitation networks, and deploy epidemiological teams to monitor for disease outbreaks, all to facilitate the mass synchronization of humanity, time, and water.
But, this brings us right back to the central paradox.
Exactly. How does a devoted pilgrim justify wading into water and actually drinking water that they can plainly smell is contaminated with sewage and that our scientific data proves is laced with heavy metals?
It's tough to wrap your head around.
How do those two realities coexist in the human mind?
The sociological research provides a brilliant framework for understanding this, actually. And it centers on distinguishing between two entirely different definitions of purity. We have to separate chemical purity from metaphysical purity.
Explain how those two operating systems differ.
Okay, so to a secular environmental scientist, purity is entirely physical and chemical. It means a lack of hexavalent chromium, a low fecal coliform count, and high dissolved oxygen. If you introduce sewage, the water becomes chemically impure.
Makes sense.
But in the spiritual framework of the devotee, purity is metaphysical. Ganga is believed to be inherently and eternally purifying. Her divine nature is absolute. It cannot be corrupted by the mere physical waste of humans.
So it's conceptually impossible for a god to become impure.
Exactly. Therefore, the water, regardless of its cloudy appearance or its chemical toxicity, retains its absolute spiritual ability to cleanse karma. The physical state of the water is totally secondary to its divine essence.
It reminds me of the concept of unconditional love. You can recognize that a loved one is physically ill or deeply flawed in their actions, but you revere their inherent soul as pristine and untouched by their current state.
That's a very apt way to describe it. But while this belief provides profound spiritual comfort, the environmental scientists point out that it creates massive, complicated blind spots.
How so?
Because if a population deeply believes the river is an indestructible, self-purifying goddess, there is significantly less psychological urgency to demand municipal sewage treatment plants.
Ah, I see.
The deep reverence actually enables a form of environmental denial. The logic becomes, why would a deity need us to clean her?
Right. But the physical reality remains deeply stubborn. The river is sick, the biological oxygen demand is killing the fish, the coliform counts are causing massive vectors of waterborne illness.
The state cannot ignore the epidemiology.
Exactly, so the secular government is forced to step in, which leads us to the monumental challenge of modern conservation, the Namami Gange mission.
Right. So if the metaphysical belief in Ganga Ma's purity provides a shield against the chemical reality of her pollution, it forces the government into a nearly impossible corner. I mean, how does a secular environmental agency clean up a deity?
The Central Pollution Control Board in India is certainly trying to measure the problem. The audits show they operate 112 official monitoring locations spread across the massive main stem states: Uttarakhand, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Jharkhand, and West Bengal. They are rigorously tracking the dissolved oxygen, the heavy metals, and the bacterial loads. And based on that data, the government launched its flagship conservation mission in 2014, called Namami Gange, the National Mission for Clean Ganga.
And this is not a small effort. It's a multi-billion-dollar, highly centralized initiative. It focuses heavily on infrastructure, building vast new sewage treatment plants in the major urban centers, developing modern riverfronts, attempting to restore floodplain biodiversity, and running public awareness campaigns.
Yet, the environmental audits we reviewed are quite sobering about the results.
Very much so.
They acknowledge that hundreds of projects have been completed, but the overall water quality improvements remain incredibly uneven. And there are massive structural reasons for this, right?
Yeah, the primary hurdle is the nature of the pollution itself. The environmental engineers distinguish between point source and non-point source pollution.
Okay, what's the difference?
So a point source is easy to target. It's the single outfall pipe from the Kanpur tannery. You can find them or force them to build an effluent treatment plant. But a vast majority of the Ganges pollution is non-point source. It is highly diffuse.
Like agricultural runoff.
Yeah. Exactly. Runoff from millions of individual farms
Nah.
spreading synthetic nitrogen fertilizers. It is untreated domestic waste from thousands of rural villages that lack basic sanitation grids. You can't just cap a single pipe to fix that.
And even in the cities, the urban growth is relentless. The urban planners point out a deeply frustrating cycle. You draft a blueprint and secure funding for a sewage treatment plant designed to handle the waste of a city of 1 million people.
Right.
But by the time the bureaucracy clears, the concrete is poured, and the plant comes online 5 years later, the city's population has grown to 1.5 million. The infrastructure simply cannot outpace the demographic explosion.
Add to that the sheer bureaucratic nightmare of the basin. The legal and policy texts highlight the overlapping layers of jurisdictional governance.
Oh, that sounds complicated.
It is. If you want to enforce a pollution standard, who actually possesses the authority? Is it the local municipal council? Is it the state government of Uttar Pradesh? Is it the central government in New Delhi? Is it the specialized environmental courts?
So no one knows who's actually in charge.
It creates a jurisdictional maze where responsibility is fractured and enforcement is easily delayed.
Which brings us to the core philosophical clash of the cleanup effort. One of the sociologists in our source stack used a brilliant analogy. You cannot just polish the leaves, you have to tend the roots.
I love that analogy.
It raises a vital question. Can a cleanup plan actually succeed if it only treats the river as secular infrastructure, like just building more concrete pipes, filters, and digital sensors, while completely ignoring the fact that millions of people relate to the water as living kin?
The overwhelming synthesis from the sociologists and the ecologists is that a purely technocratic solution is doomed to fail.
Why?
If you only build advanced sewage plants, but you don't fundamentally change how the tanneries value their waste, or how the urban planners zone the floodplains, or how the agricultural sector uses water, you're merely treating the symptoms of a terminal disease.
So true restoration requires shifting the entire economic and cultural paradigm.
Exactly. You have to integrate the spiritual identity into the environmental policy. You have to bridge the gap by convincing the population that treating the physical chemical water with rigorous ecological respect is, in fact, the highest form of honoring the goddess.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time analyzing these massive civilizational macro systems. We've talked about international treaties, divine mythology, mega dams, and billion-dollar bureaucracies.
We have.
But to truly understand the Ganges, our sources demand that we apply the microlens. We have to zoom all the way down to the riverbank and see how these titanic forces physically collide in the daily lives of individuals.
Because the macro is invisible on the ground. A local resident doesn't wake up and experience hydrology or jurisdictional governance. They experience the immediate, visceral reality of their environment.
To make this tangible, the sociological fieldwork provides us with incredibly detailed profiles of the people living on the banks. Let's look at the fishermen first.
Right. Take a fisherman living in the lower basin. He wakes up long before dawn. He knows the fluid dynamics of his local stretch of water intimately. Every seasonal eddy, every submerged sandbar. He pushes his wooden boat out into the mist and casts his nets.
But his reality is changing.
Yes, his daily reality is now defined by creeping existential anxiety. He is specifically looking for the hilsa fish, a culturally prized anadromous fish that needs to migrate from the ocean up into the freshwater to spawn.
Oh, like salmon.
Very similar.
Okay.
But the barrages have blocked their migration routes, and the low-dissolved oxygen suffocates the few that make it through. He pulls up his nets, and they are increasingly empty.
That's heartbreaking.
For him, the engineered river isn't a policy debate. It is the terrifying collapse of his livelihood and his family's generational stability.
Now, contrast him with the farmer up on the plains.
Right, the farmer's entire existence is tethered to the moisture in the soil. He might not look at the river every day, but he meticulously tracks the atmospheric pressure. He smells the quality of the silt left behind after a minor flood.
He's tuned into the rhythm.
Very tuned in. He times his planting of wheat or rice precisely to the historical rhythm of the monsoon. To him, the river system is the ultimate, indispensable provider of fertility.
But also terrifying.
Yes, it is simultaneously a source of sheer terror. He knows with absolute certainty that a delayed monsoon means drought and financial ruin, while an unexpected breach of the local levee will wash away his topsoil and his entire year's crop in a single night. He is entirely at the mercy of a force he cannot control.
And then consider the urban resident, living in the dense, chaotic streets of Kanpur or Varanasi. Their sensory world is completely overwhelmed.
Oh, the sensory overload is intense.
Right. They navigate the labyrinthine alleys leading down to the Ghats. They are hit with the thick, layered scent of burning sandalwood incense, the wood smoke from the cremation pyres, and the sharp, unmistakable tang of raw sewage and industrial chemicals.
All at once.
They rely on the river's water for daily washing and municipal supply, but they live every single day with the visible contradiction of profound spiritual beauty sitting right next to toxic degradation. They are the ones navigating the waterborne illnesses, the outbreaks of cholera or typhoid that keep their children home from school.
And finally, you have the pilgrim. The pilgrim brings an entirely different energy to the water's edge.
How so?
Well, they don't live with the daily grind of the river's economics. They have traveled from hundreds of miles away, enduring crowded trains and long walks. They step into that freezing water at dawn, surrounded by the chanting of priests and the ringing of bells.
Right.
For them, the river isn't an agricultural tool or a municipal sewer. It is a literal portal for cosmic transformation. Their experience is entirely emotional, symbolic, and deeply detached from the physical chemistry of the water.
What fascinates me is how interacting with this river actually alters human psychology, specifically how these people perceive time. In the modern Western corporate world, we experience time linearly, right? We march forward on a calendar expecting consistent daily progress.
Right, but living deeply intertwined with the Ganges forces you into cyclical time.
Cyclical time.
Yes, your life is not a straight line. It is a circle driven by the monsoon. The year is defined by the terrifying, violent swell of the floodwaters, followed by the anxious, receding wait during the dry season, punctuated by the massive influx of humanity during the astrological festival periods. Life moves in endless, repeating patterns of creation, abundance, destruction, and scarcity.
Okay, as we begin to pull back from the micro level, we need to place the Ganges in a global context to truly grasp its uniqueness. If we look at the comparative geographical data, how does the Ganges stack up against the world's other great river systems?
Comparison is the sharpest tool we have to reveal what makes a system truly distinct. If we look across the globe, most major rivers have a defining characteristic. They specialize.
Let's run through them. Look at the historical Nile. For millennia, the Nile was defined by its incredible predictability. The ancient Egyptians could literally set their agricultural calendars by the timing of its floods. It represented cosmic order.
Then look at the Amazon in South America. The Amazon is defined by its staggering, overwhelming ecological dominance.
Right, the sheer biology.
Exactly. The volume of water and the density of the surrounding rainforests are so massive that human presence, while certainly impactful and damaging, is still physically dwarfed by the sheer scale of the natural biology. Nature is unequivocally the primary actor.
Take the Mississippi River in the United States. The Mississippi is the ultimate global example of uniform, highly engineered control. It has been leveed, dredged, locked, and channelized to an extreme degree.
Completely transformed.
Right. It has been stripped of its wildness and transformed almost entirely into an efficient commercial shipping highway.
Or the Yanks in China. The Yangtze represents the absolute zenith of centralized state control. The construction of the Three Gorges Dam is a testament to a top-down government that possesses the unparalleled authority to relocate millions of citizens and alter geography to achieve a single engineering goal.
And finally, the Jordan River in the Middle East. It is deeply, fiercely sacred to multiple major world religions. It is heavily contested politically, but physically it is incredibly scarce. It is a tiny, fragile trickle compared to the massive volume of the others.
So as you see, these rivers specialize. They are defined primarily by predictability or biology or engineering or state authority or sacred scarcity.
So to use an academic analogy, it's like most rivers pick a major in college.
Right.
The Mississippi majors in structural engineering,
Yeah.
the Amazon majors in evolutionary ecology, the Jordan majors in theology, but the Ganges.
Yeah.
The Ganges is trying to major in absolutely everything at once.
It is the ultimate defining takeaway of our entire analysis. The Ganges is characterized by its maximum human pressure and its completely hybrid nature. It refuses to be just one thing. Yeah. It is heavily populated, yet partially and unevenly engineered. It is intensely toxically industrialized, yet fiercely and intimately worshipped. It is decentralized, chaotic, biologically vital, and spiritually absolute, all at the exact same time.
It's trying to carry the weight of everything for everyone.
And that is why it is buckling. The Ganges is the perfect case study for the Anthropocene epoch. It shows us exactly what happens when infinite human demand for water, for power, for absolution meets a finite, physical, natural limit on a massive civilizational scale.
Which brings us to the end of our deep dive today. Let's synthesize all of these varied sources, because ultimately the research suggests that the Ganges isn't just a complex environmental problem to be solved. It acts as a grand philosophical mirror for human existence.
It truly does. When we look deeply at the mechanics of the river, we see ourselves. We see our desperate, terrified attempts to build rigid systems, our dams, our levees, our treaties, our sewage plants, to control the inherent chaos of life.
But the chaos, the unpredictable monsoon, the sediment, it always persists. The wildness cannot be fully tamed by concrete.
We also see a profound lesson in identity. The river shows us that continuity does not require sameness. The fluid dynamics prove it is constantly flowing, constantly shifting its banks.
Right.
It is never the exact same physical water or the exact same mud from one second to the next, yet to millions, it is always identically Gangama. It maintains its absolute identity through constant, relentless physical change.
And most profoundly, the river forces us to accept ultimate contradiction. It is both fiercely, generously life-giving and terrifyingly, violently destructive.
Yes.
It brings the rich Himalayan silt that feeds hundreds of millions, and it brings the sudden, violent floods that wash away their homes in the dark. It holds these completely opposing truths simultaneously, naturally, without breaking.
Perfectly said.
All right, before we sign off, I want to distill this massive stack of research down for you.
Yeah.
Based on the hydrology, the economics, and the theology we've explored, here are the 5 key takeaways you can carry forward. Number 1, the Ganges is not just a body of water. It is a highly complex, interconnected civilizational system. You cannot change one part without altering the whole.
Right.
Number 2, it holds intense contradictions, chemical pollution and metaphysical purity, life and death, without ever resolving them.
Mm-hmm.
Number 3, it represents the absolute maximum human pressure placed upon a natural physical limit.
Yes.
Number 4, we have learned a hard sociological truth. Profound sacred reverence does not automatically guarantee environmental protection. Sometimes faith enables denial.
A tough lesson, but true.
And number 5, human engineering and control over living, restless, breathing ecological systems is always ultimately a temporary illusion.
Those 5 points perfectly capture the overwhelming complexity of the basin.
We've covered incredible ground today, but I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over on your own. It builds on the core paradox we've been circling, but it flips the perspective toward the future. We've seen how human secular engineering and deep spiritual belief are locked in this intense tug-of-war. We are desperately trying to build municipal treatment plants while simultaneously worshiping a goddess. But what happens if, in our desperate attempt to save the Ganges from the ravages of climate change and industrial pollution, we eventually succeed?
Oh, that's an interesting thought.
What if we engineer it completely? Imagine a day 50 years from now when the Ganges is perfectly regulated by a network of AI-driven digital sensors. It is perfectly filtered by advanced, unyielding treatment plants, and the water is confined entirely to safe, unbreakable, perfectly routed concrete channels.
Wow.
It becomes chemically flawless, it never floods, it never shifts, it never suffocates. If that day comes, does it actually cease to be Gangama?
That is the question.
At what precise moment of our technological intervention does a wild, living, breathing, sacred deity become nothing more than a very clean, very efficient municipal utility? Think about that next time you look at the natural world around you.
A perfectly controlled static system might no longer be a living one.
Because remember where we started. that pilgrim at dawn in Varanasi, stepping down the stone ghats into the cold, shifting, restless water. They are seeking a connection not to a filtered pipe, but to a wild force of nature. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.